It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome back into another podcast by George. These are real close to my favorite episodes. It's Laura Belin with Bleeding Heartland. She's back on the podcast by George, and we're going to be talking about a story that, off here before we came on, that she was describing as a head scratcher. It really is. And I got to tell people, I mention this on the podcast all the time. I feel like sometimes life is an insult added to an injury. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a house of mirrors. I give you an example. I'm here over the 4th of July. I mean, all of these fireworks are going off. My God, the public now has got their hands on them, and everybody's complaining about hard times. Nobody's got any money, supposedly. The wealthy are complaining about the high tax rates that they have to pay, and there are thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars of these damn fireworks going off every place. And I'm thinking, really? Honest to God, with times like this, you've got money for that type of thing? So I decided I was going to check out one of these fireworks tents, folks, and I wanted to see what people were paying for these things. So I stopped by small town, one of those fireworks tents in a grocery store parking lot, and I didn't see any pricing. But what I did see was a guy manning the register wearing a 10-gallon cowboy hat and a gun strapped to his ass right there at the register in this small town grocery store parking lot. And I looked at this guy and what are you afraid of? What are you worried about? Why would you need to do that? Why would you need to wear a gun to sell fireworks in this parking lot? And I thought, you remember Wizard of Oz? We're not in Kansas anymore. Well, sometimes I get the feeling that we're not in Iowa anymore, and there's somebody else that's not in Iowa anymore, we think. And it's some members of the Iowa State Patrol, and that's what we're going to be talking about today with Laura Belin. Laura, welcome back to the podcast by George.
Great to be here, George, as always.
Let's get started with this. So, folks, go to bleedingheartland.com. You've heard me talk about that a lot, and check out this posting. Now, this is what Laura wrote. The headline reads, "Who will pay for Iowa troopers' Texas deployment? State officials have not yet determined how an unprecedented deployment of 25 to 30, we think, Iowa State troopers to Texas will be financed." Iowa Department of Public Safety spokesperson Deborah McClung told Bleeding Heartland. Governor Kim Reynolds announced on June 24th that she approved the Texas governor's request for help in unspecified border security efforts. She's authorized to do so under the Interstate Emergency Management Assistance Compact, which I have never heard of. And well, before we go any further, I guess the very opening of this article is critical because this has been approved, Laura, but apparently not much thought was given to who was going to pay for it.
Well, you and me both had not heard of the Interstate Emergency Management Assistance Compact, but this is something that all 50 states belong to. And when I heard about this deployment, the first thing I did was go check the Iowa Code section governing the Iowa State Patrol to see if there was anything in there regarding missions out of state, because I never heard of state troopers being sent out of state for anything. I couldn't find anything in that code section. But then when I asked the Department of Public Safety, they directed me to a different code section, which deals with the governor's emergency powers. And that's where it refers to this Emergency Management Assistance Compact. Now, normally, when the governor responds to a request under that compact, she would send the Iowa National Guard. And that's what some other states are sending the National Guard down to Texas. But as for sending state troopers down there, the Department of Public Safety told me that in the 24 years since Iowa joined this interstate compact, they don't have any record of the Iowa State Patrol ever being deployed out of state before now.
It goes on to say that the Public Safety Department has declined to clarify where the state troopers will be sent or what they will be doing. And when I read this in Bleeding Heartland, I think this is all part of this stonewall that you're encountering time and again, particularly from the governor's office. these are state employees. This is state money. This is a state decision. This is public. This should be public record. How can they refuse to let folks even know where the troopers are being sent?
Well, and it's true that in many cases, actually, I'm working on a couple of stories right now that may interest you eventually, but I'm getting stonewalled, just no response whatsoever on those. But in this case, the Department of Public Safety is stonewalling every reporter the same way they're stonewalling me. They're saying that they won't give out any mission specific information. So that means they won't tell us when this deployment will happen. We actually don't know whether any of the troopers have already been sent down there or whether they'll be going to Texas later this month. They did confirm that it's about 25 to 30 people. They confirmed that they put out a call for volunteers and they found state troopers. So they didn't assign anyone who wasn't interested in this mission. They didn't assign anyone to go down to Texas, but they aren't going to say what they're doing or where they'll be in Texas. I'm hoping, frankly, that one of these volunteers is so eager that the person will be posting on social media or telling friends who will post on social media what they're up to down there. So I think there may be a backdoor way for us to eventually find out. But there are exemptions in the public records law for security related information. And so the Department of Public Safety generally, I think they take a broad interpretation of all of those exemptions. So that's what we're up against right now. But in terms of who's going to pay for it, eventually they will have to release who's paying for this mission. That's not something they'll be able to hide under the open records law.
Well, normally you would just say taxpayers are on the hook. We're going to be paying for it. But this is where this thing gets really weird and kind of interesting. And it has to do with the National Guard and how this has normally been done. South Dakota is an example of what's going on. Iowa, for whatever reason, maybe because of our repeated Republican administrations, we've gotten this great affinity with people or state governments in South Dakota, Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, Florida, even places like that. I'm not exactly up with that. But anyway, God. So South Dakota is sending National Guard members, and they're doing it at the behest, apparently, of some billionaire in Tennessee that's actually paying for this, kind of a privatized palace guard, for God's sake, coming out of South Dakota and headed to Texas.
Yeah, I started asking about who was paying for this before I heard about South Dakota, because I was wondering, the Iowa State Patrol received about $10 million in CARES Act funding. That's federal COVID relief money last year to pay for just their regular salaries. So I was wondering, did that free up money? So are they using state appropriated money that was supposed to go to the Iowa State Patrol? Are they going to be using that to fund this Texas mission? And I was told discussions about payment structures are ongoing. That's what the spokesperson said. Then I read about South Dakota having their National Guard mission funded by a billionaire from Tennessee. So I asked again, just to make sure, is it possible? Is this private? So this approach, a private donation, is that on the table for Iowa? Of course, no response at all from the governor's office, not even a no comment, just ignored the emails. But the Department of Public Safety just said again that the expenses haven't been calculated yet, and that there haven't been any discussions. They didn't indicate to me that there have been discussions about a private donation, but she also didn't say that's absolutely out of the question. So don't know what our governor is going to be considering. I mean, I would guess that maybe they feel that they have room in the Iowa State Patrol's budget to pay for this kind of mission. I have no idea how much it costs to send 25 or 30 people down to Texas for 2 weeks for this kind of thing. I should also say that the Department of Public Safety has been trying to downplay the significance of this by saying this is really similar to other short-term missions that we do, like during RAGBRAI, they have state troopers out there, and during the Iowa State Fair, they have state troopers on the fairgrounds.
In Iowa.
Those are big events. Yes, those are big events happening, affecting tens of thousands of people in the state of Iowa. That's not sending them on an errand that we don't know what the heck they're going to be doing down there for 2 weeks. And of course, this Iowa State Fair and RAGBRAI are time limited events, but this border security mission, whatever it is, I mean, that's not something that can be solved with a 2-week deployment.
Well, it sounds kind of like a banana republic. I tell you what I thought
Yeah.
when I was reading your reporting on this, this sounds more like this continued blurring of the lines. And I was reminded of your reporting about this COVID response with the National Guard, and then that goofy charity event that apparently was paid for with big time private donor money. Although I don't know what the final resolution of that was. This appears to be part of the MO of Governor Reynolds' office.
Yes, I mean, she's definitely blurring the lines. And in this case, I mean, the other thing that's just, I mean, it's almost amusing is that you'll probably recall a few months ago, she was doing an interview with a conservative talk radio host. And she said that when asked, that she said the federal government had asked the state of Iowa to help house some unaccompanied minor refugee children. And she said, we don't have the resources for that. This is not our problem. This is Joe Biden's problem. He created the problems at the border and he has to solve it. So all of a sudden, less than 3 months later, we're sending state patrol down to Texas. And the way that it was worded in the press release, she literally said Iowa has no choice but to react to the problems at the border, because she said that my first responsibility is to the health and safety of Iowans, and the humanitarian crisis at our nation's southern border is affecting all 50 states. Iowa has no choice but to act. I mean, that's just a laughable statement that we have no choice but to send our state patrol. And this is about 5% of the active duty, the state troopers contingent right now. So, I mean, one question that I had was how many troopers are going to be out on the highways this 4th of July weekend? And how does that compare with what would normally be happening, what kind of staffing you would normally have? And again, they didn't give me that information because they said for security reasons, they don't release any specifics about, but they said that they would be fully staffed on the highways this 4th of July weekend. Of course, 4th of July is often one of the deadliest days to be on the road, with many people taking road trips and many people partying and unfortunately drunk driving afterwards.
No doubt. And it sounds like she's buying in hook, line, and sinker to this extreme right wing Stephen King kind of idea, thinking that we're being overrun by this horde of illegal immigrants, drug addicted and, lusting for violence against all Americans, and we need to protect ourselves. And that seems like what Reynolds is doing on the left. I got to admit, they're not the left actually, but on the Democratic side, I mean, some of the same type of thing with the Russians are coming. I mean, I hear it on both sides, but particularly on the right. The one thing that I was struck by, just listening to you talk, it reminded me of probably the greatest Republican in Republican sane minds anyway, in modern history, Robert Ray. I mean, he welcomed the boat people because he knew we were responsible largely for the plight of those people into the state of Iowa. Now compare that to what Reynolds said, what she officially stated in that response that you cited. I mean, that really is jaw-dropping.
It is. It is. And I mean, they didn't even ask. The Iowa Department of Human Services just flat out said, they told the federal government, we don't have the resources to help. If they had put out a call and said, are any organizations or people in Iowa willing to help house unaccompanied refugee children, I'm sure that many nonprofits would have stepped forward. For all we know, there may even be extended family of some of these children at the border in Iowa, and it just wasn't. There was no effort even, and we don't know that it probably wouldn't have even cost the state very much to put out a call like that. So that it was disappointing, and many people noticed that contrast to Bob Ray, who, by the way, was one of the few Republicans my mother ever voted for. But truly, I mean, a decent human being. And by the way, people like to talk about that now. That wasn't all that popular when he did that in the 1970s. There were a lot of people who didn't want the boat people.
I remember, yeah.
So he was willing to stand up and say, this is something we have a moral responsibility to help with. And I'm not saying, I mean, it's possible that there might be work that's needed to be done in Texas that might be worth sending Iowa State troopers down there. But this really looks more like a publicity stunt because, as I mentioned, I mean, any problems happening at the border are not things that could be solved on a 2-week mission by 25 or 30 state troopers.
Well, it's a political stunt. I'm sure. I mean, you could go real cynical on this, and you could look at it and say, well, she has complete authority over Iowa State troopers and has the ability to do this without being circumvented. Now, when it comes to the National Guard, and I'm not an expert on this, Laura, but my understanding is first call can come from the governor to deal with state needs, with the Iowa National Guard as an example. But the ultimate authority over the state's National Guards is with the federal government and the President of the United States. That's how John Kennedy was able to send National Guard troops to protect kids wanting to get into the schools and stuff in the Deep South during the 60s. I mean, that's probably going a little far. I mean, I don't want to get on the conspiracy train here, but that could be one part of it, I guess. I don't know.
It could be. I mean, as I mentioned, other states are sending their National Guards, and Iowa apparently has a couple of dozen National Guard personnel in Texas already in response to a federal request from last October. That was according to the governor's press release that announced this deployment of the Iowa State Patrol. So it's possible, that crossed my mind as well, that maybe the governor doesn't want the oversight that could come with sending National Guard troops, or maybe doesn't want the federal government releasing information about what they're doing in Texas, but she has more of a free hand with the Iowa State Patrol. But again, this has never been done before. An Iowa governor has not deployed state troopers outside the state for this kind of mission before. And the State Patrol is not fully staffed right now. This is quite a few, quite a 5%, as I mentioned, of their active troopers. And even though they're volunteers, I mean, you just wonder what that means for the people left behind. A lot of state employees take vacation time over the summer, and you'd hope that we're not going to be short-staffed on the highways at a time. They said that travel is returning to pre-pandemic levels, so there are a lot of people out there on the roads.
Well, folks, I got to say that this is just one example of what you'll find on Bleeding Heartland. Now, before we let Laura go today, I'm going to bring something else up on screen here, which is not from Bleeding Heartland, but I want to see if I can get this to come on screen. We got to clarify here. We got to make sure that everybody understands. We're talking about the state troopers going down there and the National Guard down there. But I was reminded of this. Now, this is what the folks at Laura's well aware of, the good friends, the Star Tribune folks up in Minneapolis. Iowans say government response to devastating storm is too little too late. Dateline Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It was about a year ago, folks. You remember this, right? After a week sleeping outside on a lawn chair, Jason Lincoln wasn't impressed by President Donald Trump's hour-long visit last week, 8 days after the worst disaster ever to hit the eastern Iowa city. Stopping in on a campaign swing, Trump got a 20-minute briefing from Iowa officials, never left the airport. He doesn't know anything about our state, Lincoln said. He never did a drive-through or a flyover. He went straight to Yuma, Arizona to campaign. The performance of Governor Kim Reynolds didn't fare any better in the judgment of Dave Ellingrod. They don't care. It's pretty obvious, Ellingrod said, taking a break and cracking a beer. His friends helped him collect belongings from his damaged apartment. She listens to Trump and does whatever he tells her. Reynolds' office did not respond to a request for comment. Remember what Laura was saying about Stonewalling? Iowa's second largest city, with a population of more than 130,000, was devastated August 10th, 2020 by a rare derecho, a straight-line windstorm that cut a 40-mile swath through the heart of the state with winds up to 112 miles per hour. The storm killed 3 people and injured more than 60. The entire city lost power and cell service for days. Nearly every home, every business suffered damage. More than 1,000 homes were destroyed and another 4,000 significantly damaged. Iowa homes, farms, and businesses suffered an estimated $4 billion in losses. Relief efforts were hampered by the loss of communications and power, as well as the dangers posed by downed power lines, impassable streets. Still, across the region, residents said the official response to the disaster has been too little too late. Nobody's seen the mayor. He's disappeared, said Kendra Davidson. The government is too slow, said Amanda Cooley, heading to her friend's home to clear debris. It's the community who is responding. It's the people from other states who have come to help. That's the only reason anything's getting done. Okay. I mean, this goes on, and it's history. I mean, let me get this off the screen. But the reason I wanted to bring that up, Laura, before we take off here is I could rename the podcast, as I've mentioned, Insult to Injury. I mean, that was a very slow use of the National Guard by the governor. People were needing it here in Iowa. They weren't getting it. And you could look at that and say, well, maybe they were wanting to minimize cost or whatever. But when the state of Texas needs help at its border at the request of a Republican governor, we can certainly send resources down there, it seems like, in a blink of an eye.
Yeah, I mean, there was some reporting on this last August, and of course, the governor's office angrily disputed. But Andy Cox did a story for Iowa Watch at the time saying that the governor was very slow to request the presidential declaration of a disaster, and that there were resources that could have been mobilized more quickly to help the people affected by the derecho. I mean, I haven't been up to Cedar Rapids since then, but I heard from my friends who were up there, it was just like a war zone. And the pictures people were posting on social media, they'd say, well, you'd think like, oh, well, that's just the worst looking street. But every street in Cedar Rapids looked like that. They lost half their tree canopy. Many roofs were damaged, power lines were down, and it was hard to get anyone in for help. They had linemen, they had to pull in linemen from all over. They actually were coming in from other states just to help restore power to people. There were so many people without power for days. I mean, we were without power for about 3.5 days just in the Des Moines area, and the damage here wasn't nearly as extensive as it was in Cedar Rapids. So yes, I mean, the governor was criticized at that time for a relatively slow response to the derecho.
And what does the National Guard have? How can they help insert? Well, that's really what they're good at. I mean, they've got portable electric generators, big ones. They've got portable water trucks. They've got sewage capabilities. They've got all of those things that they needed and could have been used there. And instead, we got some of them, we think, down in Texas. We got state troopers down in Texas, we think. And maybe we're going to find out for sure since Laura Belin is on the case. I'm going to put the website up. We're out of time. I want to make sure that everybody goes to bleedingheartland.com. And Laura, with this stonewalling that you're running into, that you're not allowed in the news conferences. I've mentioned that a lot. They're not.
They actually let me into the last governor's news conference. Wow. They did not kick me out of. They didn't let me ask a question, but they didn't kick me out of the room. So that was new. So that was just in the last couple of weeks. Great. So I'm going to just see how that goes.
Oh, good. Great.
But yes, but it's true. I mean, they really don't answer, and they don't even send me a no comment most of the time. But this governor's office is not really that responsive even to other reporters, and they don't even have a usable public schedule. Like most governors will put out their public schedule late the week before so that the media organizations can plan for what they're going to be covering, and they hardly announce any of her public events anymore. So it's really not there's very little transparency in that office. And then, some of the granular questions I'm asking, like about following the money, those are things they especially don't want to release. So I'm still battling to try. I haven't gotten any public records out of the governor's office since before the pandemic. So still fighting on a lot of fronts, but I will keep after them. And if we find out more about what the state troopers are doing down in Texas, I will definitely be writing about that.
That's great. Go to bleedingheartland.com and you'll know as soon as she knows. And while you're there, subscribe, become a member, join them on Patreon. I have become a patron, support the cause, because Bleeding Heartland is doing work that no one else is. And Laura, I'm glad of it. Thanks again for coming back on Podcast by George.
Oh, thanks for having me, George.
And that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up for this particular episode. What I like to tell folks is, if you like Podcast by George, make sure that you follow us, sign up on YouTube. You can subscribe, ring that notification bell, give us that thumbs up, leave a comment on iTunes. A lot of folks listen there. And of course, it's easy to follow us, the video episodes on Facebook. But that's all there is. There ain't no more. That's another Podcast by George.